Good evening, everybody. So, a few things. So this is an uplift. So we'll have a little bit of a talk and some songs, and then we'll have the rest of the talk. It should all work together, I hope. I'm still working on getting the size of the fonts right whenever I submit a PowerPoint. So this one may be a little smaller, but maybe everybody will be okay. And so another thing, they messed up and they gave me a really cool clicker this time. So as we get to talking about things, I can show y'all that it's nice. So we may be here a little while if I get to the teaching mode. So that's why I'm making my stuff stand behind here, because if I get to walking around with the lapel mic and I got a laser pointer, we'd be here a while. So we don't want to do that. Lastly, we are going to start off. Some of this is some science that I don't know. Everybody may already know this, and it's just a review for everybody. If you don't let your eyes gloss over. I've got a point to all of it. And then I think it's important to discuss these things even in a setting like this, not just in a teenage class. Because a good preacher friend that I love dearly, he said apologetics has never saved anybody. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I know it's made some people fall away, a lack of it anyways. So these are some things that I've heard and that I've known. And it almost happened to me several times in school too, just because everybody was so adamant, and the things you see in the textbook, water boils at this temperature, or this temperature is a true thing. You can go out and study that. They're sitting right beside evolution of the Big Bang Theory in the same book. So you're like, well, if this is true, then is this true also? So, well, no, it's not, and here's why. So I'm not going to cover all that in this talk, but we are going to talk some neat things about water. Water's a pretty common thing in nature. Water's 70% of what makes you up. So it's pretty neat how it all works together. So we're going to talk about some things about water that are pretty neat. If you get enough coincidences, it starts to look more like providence. So we're going to talk about how all these things that water can do and that water does, to me, that looks like God providing for us to be able to live on this earth. And it's the way God set up earth to run. So we're going to talk about that first, and then we'll get into how water is found in Scripture. So again, if you can't see the font, I do apologize. There we go. So what is water? Well, you got one oxygen, two hydrogens. So technically it's dihydrogen monoxide, but I'll call it water from now on because that's how everybody knows it. The way it's put together, the way it goes together in nature, the way God made it come together, is it gives it a negative charge and a positive charge. That means you can have hydrogen bonds, so it just likes to stick together. It likes to stick together. That's all that means. Now, we'll use those to describe why things work going forward, but it just likes to stick together. So, water, was it created for life? Water is one of the very few molecules that are liquid. I'm thinking of oil and gasoline and water. I can't think of many more things that are liquid at room temperature. Why does it do that? Well, that's one of its cool properties. God made it that way. Yeah, but it's also, we kind of know why. It's because of that hydrogen bonding. It likes to stick together. It's also one of the few things that on Earth can be found in all three states of matter. You can just go out and find ice, you can go out and find liquid water, and you can find clouds, which are steam. To find liquid and most of anything else, you got to dig in the earth because it's lava. Or to find other things that are air, nitrogen and stuff's in the air, but you can't find liquid nitrogen unless you get really, really cold. Like we have to make most everything, you have to make it be that. But in nature, water exists as all these three things. So there is a way you can think about it is, it's hard to imagine a triune God being all three at the same time. But water also exists all three at the same time. It's got its own properties, but it's still all the same water. So that's another neat little thing that God might have winked at us and say, here, if you got a hard time thinking about it, why don't you think about water? So it's also unique how it freezes. This is actually lets life actually exist on the earth as it is. Most things, as they get colder, they just continue to get colder and continue to get colder until they freeze. Like when you melt glass or liquid or metal, they'll just freeze and they'll sink. Water's very, very unique. As it gets about 3 or 4 degrees before the freezing point, it actually expands. It gets bigger, so it floats. So then you have ice on top, and then a warm layer of water, and then cold water on the bottom. If it didn't do that, it would freeze from the bottom up, and then every lake, every river would freeze from the bottom up, and then you wouldn't have your ecosystem anymore. All your fish would freeze, everything would freeze. You wouldn't have life on earth as we know it if water didn't behave like that. And it does that because of the way it's shaped, the hydrogen bonds, the way it floats like that. So that's pretty neat. Water is what we call the universal solvent. It will dissolve about everything. If you look at the Grand Canyon, it's dissolved rocks. If you have smooth rocks in your river, water's run across them enough that it roughs off the edges. And the reason that's important is because it'll dissolve all the salts and minerals we need for life as well. That's why the ocean is salty. That's why water is used in most of your sauces and most of your drinks, because it'll dissolve just about anything you put in it. And think about our blood. Our blood is mostly water, and that's what carries our nutrients back and forth in our body is our blood. So it dissolves, it drops off the good stuff, picks up the bad stuff. It's really good at dissolving things. And that's because the shape of water. I told you that negative and positive part of it. Well, that lets it dissolve both the negative and positives of salt. So it's pretty neat. Again, if you think enough coincidences, you start looking at providence. So there's a few slides in here that I forgot to add. I'll just talk about them real quick. Osmosis, that's just how water likes to level off concentrations, and that's how your kidneys work. So if it didn't dissolve things, which means it likes to have osmosis, that's how your kidneys work too, so you wouldn't have that. We're going to talk about specific heat of water. All that is how much heat something can absorb before it changes temperature. So that's why your car gets hot when sun hits it. It's absorbing the heat, it's absorbing the energy. Well, water has an incredibly high specific heat. That means it's a good temperature buffer. So with the earth being 70% water, it helps change the temperature to not be so much. Now, you do have extremes, but they're all kind of within livable range for wildlife. The super hot desert, the super cold poles, not as much, but for the most part, where there's a lot of water around, everything's kind of the same temperature all year round. You can go to the beach in the wintertime and it not be freezing cold water. It'll be cool, but it won't be freezing cold water. But if you look at all the other metals and stuff that we know, those all heat up and they all melt with a little bit of heat, actually, compared to water. The next thing is surface tension. I've got a funny story about surface tension later if you want to hear it. It involves a VBS, but I won't tell it here. Surface tension, because water likes to mingle around itself, it'll stick to itself as a liquid. Well, as you get to the edge where there's not water on top, everything kind of flattens out, and it'll make a bounce. So that's why bugs can hang out on top of water. It's because of the surface tension. It's literally sitting on the water molecules like a trampoline. That's why water balls up in a sphere, because as you get to the edge, it wants to close together. And a sphere has the greatest volume and the lowest surface area you can have of any shape. So that's why water does that. So surface tension lets animals and stuff live on the surface. That's how your mosquito larvae and all that work, because you can put a drop of soap in your buckets at home that destroys the surface tension, that kills the mosquitoes. But that's why that works. And so, even though we all hate mosquitoes, they are a good food source for a lot of other animals. So we're almost done with our first part of my lesson. So how do we use water as humans? God designed it to do all these cool things so we can use it to move things, hydraulic power, electricity production. Either water falls through a turbine, like in a dam, or you heat up the water as steam and it turns a turbine. That's how we make electricity. That's how the biggest majority of our electricity is made in the world. We use it to cook with, we clean with it, we bathe in it, and we also use it for recreation. So anytime you see water, I hope you'll think about a few of these things, maybe something you didn't know, but again, God made everything we see, including the tiny molecule water, and it's pretty neat the things that he allows to do that you might not have thought about how it works. So we'll have our first set of songs. All right. So everybody ready for the quiz? Just kidding. I forgot two, but I'll leave those. If you want to know about two more, you can come see me, but we'll skip ahead from that. So, next thing we're going to talk about is where's water used in the Bible. So not only did God create it to do all these wonderful things for us, and it's an amazing molecule that we can study and see God's finger in creating that, he also uses a good bit in the water. So again, apologize for the font size for some of you. I'm learning. So we know in creation, in Genesis 1:2, it talks about the Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters. In Genesis 1:9-10, God said, let the waters on the heavens be gathered together in one place. Dry land appeared, and it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called the seas, and God saw that it was good. And then in Genesis 1:20, God said, let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures. So there was water. God divided the waters and made dry land for us to live on. And then he made creatures in the water that, they keep up the ecosystem and also provide for us as well. So all the time, God's looking out for us. Then we have the flood, right? So Genesis 7, we got a lot of men doing a lot of bad things, and God regrets making the world. But Noah was righteous. So Noah's the one that saved us through his family. God cleansed the earth and saved Noah with water. He used water to wash and make all things new. And that we kind of look at that and see how that leads to baptism, but we'll get to that in a moment. So then we got Moses. Man, that's small. Sorry, guys. Again, when you look at the computer screen, it's kind of hard to visualize it up here. So, but I will read them. We know this place takes place in Exodus. Baby Moses was put in the Nile River. And what the first plague was turning all to blood. We got the Red Sea crossing. So God made the water split apart. We got dry land. And then, the water closed back in on Pharaoh's troops. And then while they're walking through the wilderness, we got water from the rock twice. Once was as prescribed, the next time was not as prescribed. And that's what, kept Moses from seeing the promised land. So, for entering in, rather. So water's still being used by God. And he also used it whenever he was the pillar of the cloud, because we all know that's water as well. He was the pillar of cloud in the day. Other times, water is used in the Old Testament, and I think there's 400 some odd mentions of the word water in the Bible total. So we're not going to cover all those, of course, but there's some stories that I really like to discuss. If you've not read about the Gibeonite deception, we were at a VBS this past Wednesday. That's in Joshua. It's a neat story, the Gibeonite deception. But at the end of it, they end up being the water carriers for the people. David's mighty men, the water from the well. If you don't know that story, David's fighting. He's been kind of pushed out of the city. They're holed up in a cave, and he kind of mentions, I sure would like to have some water from this well back home. It's kind of like us saying, I sure would like to have some Milo's tea. And then somebody runs to the Milo's store, the restaurant, not just the grocery store. It'd be like somebody running to the Milo's restaurant and getting a cup of tea and bring it back to us. Well, his mighty men fight through the military camp, get water from this well, bring it back to him several miles there and back. And they show up with this for their king that they love and they serve. And what does he do? He says, I'm not worthy of this. He dedicates it to God and pours it out. He says, I'm not worthy of that sacrifice. So that's a really neat story about water. And then, of course, we know Jonah and the big fish, or Jonah and the whale. So God can use water in that way as well. He made the storm, rocked the boat, said, hey, Jonah, you need to do what I ask you to do. So eventually he gets there. So, water in the Bible, we also have Jesus, his baptism. That's incredibly small. And also, I have my ESV Bible, and that's New King James Version, so that's twice. So not only are we going to learn about differences in versions, y'all get to squint. But I'm going to read that. I'm going to start in Matthew chapter 3, verse 13. Then Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to John to be baptized by him. John would prevent him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? But Jesus answered, let it be so now, for thus is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness. Then he consented, and when Jesus was baptized, immediately he went up from the water. Behold, the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God ascending like a dove, coming to rest on him. And behold, a voice from heaven said, this is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. So, as we know, Jesus was baptized to fulfill all righteousness. And then some miracles Jesus uses water. The first one was water to wine. Then we had, he was healing by the pool. He healed a man by the pool. And and was waiting on the pool to be disturbed, and Jesus comes along and said, pick up your mat. Jesus walked on water. I doubt that was surface tension. I'm pretty sure that was a miraculous thing. And then we have calming of the storm. So I don't know too many people that can say, hey, be still, but Jesus could because, he created everything. So the last thing I want to discuss tonight, it's really small again, I'm sorry. Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, because this is probably the most important use of water that we have today. It's baptism. So I will read this again. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I want to skip down to the actual baptism part. But Philip is being told to go, and he meets up with the Ethiopian eunuch. He sees him studying. He's studying from a passage in Isaiah. We're going to pick up in Acts chapter 8, verse 34. So that's less than what's up there. But you probably can't read that anyways. So we're going to pick in chapter 8 of Acts, verse 34. But it's after he reads to him the passage of Scripture. And the eunuch says to Philip, about whom, I ask you, does the prophet say this, about himself or about someone else? Then Philip opened his mouth, and beginning with the Scripture, he told him the good news about Jesus. So exactly what we're supposed to do is tell people the good news about Jesus. And as they were going along the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, see, here's water. What prevents me from being baptized? He commanded the chariot to stop. They both went down the water, Philip and the eunuch, and he baptized him. They come by the water, the Spirit of the Lord carried Philip away, and the eunuch saw him no more and went on his way rejoicing. Philip found himself at Azotus, and he passed through, he preached to all the towns until he came to Caesarea. So, the most important use we have today is baptism for water. So, in this quick summary, and this may be the fastest uplift we've ever had. Quick summary, water is an amazing creation. We can see it was created. Its shape tells us that. Its properties it has tells us that. And the uses it is in nature and for us lead us to believe that, hey, water was a created thing. And also we see it's used in salvation. It's used for cleansing us, not just, washing away of the filth from the body, but cleansing the soul. It's used for showing God's power. If you look in the Old Testament, a lot of times we show God's power. You look in the New Testament and the miracles, we show God's power. And God's power to use water as a means of salvation for us. And it shows us God's love. Water is one of the most abundant things around. So what else could he have picked that would have been better to use as a means of baptism? I mean, it's 70% of the earth. There's water almost everywhere. So I think that shows God's love for us in using water in salvation. So if any of this has pricked your heart tonight, if something you didn't understand, if you need to talk about anything, if you need prayers from the church, I know this may not be your typical Wednesday night or Sunday night lesson, but if your heart's been pricked by any of this, or if you know you need to come forward, or if you know you need to be baptized, hey, there's water available. So come forward as we sing.